Well, I hear you, and we're all worried about that. And, I've debunked what I'm calling the domino theory. Every time online someone says Putin needs to be stopped in Ukraine, not on the Atlantic shores.
Oh,
I said,
jeez.
good God. I said, stop with the domino theory. That was dismissed after Vietnam. And I'm using the domino theory again because isn't that what the opposition is using here, the warmongers? The
Of
domino
course, it
theory?
was used in Afghanistan. It was used again in Iraq.
Oh, it
I listened
was?
to General Abizaid early on. If we don't stop these Islamists now, we'll be fighting them in our own country.
I
Well,
see. Same
one
story.
of, one of my friends who was serving in Iraq at the time, he sent a message to me, just texted it to me, and he said, "I'm trying to figure out how all these Arabs with their outfits on are going to get on little boats and float over to the United States to threaten us."
Well,
He said, "These
They
people
could
can't get out of their own way. Who are we kidding?"
they could have taken El Al or
It's this is the same crap over and over and over again to goad us into war.
well,
But
okay.
this time
I
it's really dangerous.
but you and I both agree that we want peace. The important thing for
Oh,
us to talk about is peace. And
absolutely.
again,
But
I'm a civilian talk show host. You are a military man, West Point, VMI, PhD in international relations from the University of Virginia. Uh, you led one of the largest tank battles in the Battle of 73 Easting, the U.S. Army's largest tank battle since World War II. I have to keep repeating that because people want to forget your expertise, and I don't forget it. It's just like they try to dismiss me as a nobody, and I won't let them do it online, and I won't let them do it to any of my guests either. We're not all equal just because we can all tweet. That's the problem, you know. So I'm going to ask you as an expert, am I correct in saying the reason we refuse to negotiate is because the military industrial complex is one element and the State Department with its primitive neocon Reagan-esque view of Russia, are those the two pillars that are keeping this going?
I think that's a reasonable assessment. One of the things that people don't seem to understand, and I include many people in uniform, if you go back to 1990 and 1991, uh, you'll remember that we were already in the process of beginning to quote unquote downsize the armed forces,
I
especially
remember.
the army.
Yes.
And Saddam Hussein did us an enormous favor. If he'd have waited a couple of years, we'd have been in a much weaker position to respond. But he did so in a very timely fashion for us. And it worked out brilliantly because we had an enormous amount of military power in terms of people and equipment and capabilities that were effectively a legacy of the Cold War. Well, today that legacy is gone. We don't have those surpluses of military power. We don't have a monopoly on all the precision strike, the space based surveillance, reconnaissance, intelligence. All of those things lie in the hands of the Russians and the Chinese and Iranians and others now, particularly the Russians. And we're not prepared for an all out
Wait,
war.
wait, you're saying the Russians have a more advanced set of systems on those levels than we do?
Not necessarily more advanced, but they certainly have the equal of whatever we have.
So when this general on Fox News said that we'll take out their armed forces, what does he mean? You're going to B-52 bombing raids like in Vietnam?
Well, they won't last long because they stand an excellent chance of being shot down by integrated air defenses, something we don't have. We
Now, who
rely on the Air Force to shoot everything down with aircraft, and the Russians rely far more heavily on ground based integrated air defenses. We don't have anything like that, and they can shoot down everything, including the stealth aircraft that we place so much value on.
what? The SS-3s? Is that what they have? Is that what they're called? Or they're more advanced than
No,
that?
well, you have the S400s and S300s, and the thing is that you have multiple levels and layers of air defense to deal with everything. And we don't have that. In other
How many
words,
feet? How
they
many
can
feet?
shoot down a drone as easily as they can an aircraft at 30,000 feet.
What's the maximum ceiling on their anti-aircraft?
Oh, I suppose it could go out to 40,000, maybe higher. It depends. But
So
the point
you,
is that they're in a position to shoot us down. Let's face it.
now, what about the delivery of the Patriots? I'm going to give you a primitive viewpoint. My point again. I'm very cynical to begin with. So we're sending Patriots, allegedly a very complex system. It's going to take months of training in England or Poland, wherever. Uh, are these Patriots that we're sending over somewhat obsolete now compared to
No,
what they're still
no.
very advanced?
They are up to the task of dealing with Russian aircraft and tactical ballistic missiles. That's what they were really designed for.
So they would stop an incoming nuclear weapon?
Well, I don't know that they're going to face any nuclear weapons, but I know that they can stop some, probably not all. I mean, first of all, we got to understand that we're talking about a battery, and that's perhaps 8 launchers. And those 8 launchers, each one can fire 128 missiles at a shot.
Interesting.
Now, when you start doing the math, it doesn't take very long to figure out that since you fire 2 missiles at every incoming target, you're going to go through a lot of missiles quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Those are very difficult to build. We don't have a huge arsenal sitting there of missiles. So they're going to have to be careful what they use. Now, the second part of this, if you look at that entire aid package, we don't need to go through it all. Most of that stuff won't arrive in Ukraine for months. And the war may well be over by then on Russian terms.
Don't they have to bring those batteries in by rail or by truck?
One would assume so. And they'll be targeted as soon as they cross the Ukrainian border. They'll see them when they get off the railheads in Poland. They'll probably be shipped through Gdansk to the Polish border where they're offloaded or put on some other transport and then moved. And I don't know how far forward they'll want to move them. If they're going to use them for military sensitive command and control sites or they're going to put them around part of Kiev, I have no idea. But it's still a point defense weapon. It's not going to defend a large area. In order to defend a really large area in a theater of war like Ukraine, you would need 10 battalions, not just one battery. So this is a gesture.
As it's a gesture of support and to threaten Russia that if you keep escalating, we'll escalate. We'll keep raising the stakes. We know they're playing a game of chips. So what is the tactical advantage to Putin to destroy Kiev? Because I don't think he's going to do that. See, I think it's a feign. If I were a tactician, I'd make believe I was going to go for the capital of the nation. I would take out other targets instead. He doesn't want the bad PR, and he doesn't want to kill civilians. What's the advantage to Russia to take out Kiev by saturation bombing?
None. And the first time the Russians went in towards Kiev, it was a feint. People talk about the quote unquote Battle of Kiev. That's a lot of nonsense. It never happened. That was entirely designed to draw Ukrainian forces away from southern and eastern Ukraine.
Well, the State Department had said that they're going to invade Kiev at a certain point. I remember that.
Well, I think that's the last option. In other words, what he's interested in doing now, what the Russian armed forces are being told to do in the next series of offensives that'll begin sometime, I suspect, in January, early February, late January, early February, is annihilate what's left of the Ukrainian armed forces on the ground. That's their mission. Dispose of them, eliminate them completely, and at the same time, stop the flow of weaponry coming into Ukraine from Poland.
Can they stop it?
Well, absolutely they can stop it. And they really haven't set out to do it in a complete military fashion. I mean, they can target the whole length of that border, and they can move forces up to that border if they need to.
From where?
Well, that depends on how they decide to do it. I mean, they have the capability now of attacking from several directions at once, or they can do it sequentially.
Belarus would be one.
Sure, of course. They could come down from Belarus down south and put a force between Kiev and the Polish border.
Oh, God. I'm actually sitting here trying to absorb all of what you're telling me because you've given me some new information about the Patriots, the Patriot missile systems, and I think you said that there's 8 batteries?
No, 8 launchers in one battery. There's only one battery. Each launcher fires at one time 16 missiles.
So what's the total number? Are we sending them 1,000 missiles?
Well, I don't
No,
know, because I would say that we probably can't afford to send more than that.
no, you say one battery. I'm sorry, I'm doing the math. One battery, and
Right.
there's eight what?
Eight
Eight
launchers
launch.
in one
And
battery.
how many?
Each launcher can fire 16 missiles
16 missiles per, okay, per
launcher.
launcher. Well, there's the math.
And then you fire two missiles at every incoming target
Two,
to make sure that you actually disable the target or destroy it.
well, if I were this guy Freed, I could probably do the math in my head. The one who was just given the crypto genius.
Well, I wouldn't rely on his numbers, but
Well, I wouldn't take him to the bank. I'll tell you that.
yeah,
I wouldn't.
good Lord. But having said that, what I would also point out is that the Russians are very good at overwhelming air defenses. In other words, if you want to put an air defense battery out of business quickly, first and foremost, you put up a lot of targets that are frankly meaningless and let them expend missiles against them. And then once you know exactly where they are based on the missiles that they're firing, you target them and destroy them from a distance. So you've got drones, you've got cruise missiles, you've got tactical ballistic missiles, you've got any number of different options that you can use.
You mean to draw?
The point is,
to draw out,
this is not going to
draw
work.
out the missiles.
Yes, of
so
course.
It's like dropping chaff from a B-52 bomber over Vietnam.
Yes, only this time everybody's going to shoot at the chaff.
Unbelievable. So no one's talked about the Russians dropping chaff, in essence, or the equivalent of.
Well, because they don't want to talk about the various systems they can put up there that are meaningless. That'll just be targets.
The Savage Nation. It's savage, uncut, unfiltered, and raw.
So this Patriot gift of the United States for Ukraine is window dressing, Colonel?
Effectively, yes. It's not going to change anything. That's why it was so interesting to listen to people talk about it being a game changer. Any competent air defense officer will explain that it can be successful at defending a fairly small point on the ground, a small section, a neighborhood, if you would, of Kiev. But that's it.
Okay.
An airfield.
So if I was a Russian general, and I'm not, I would say let them put them around Kiev and attack somewhere else.
Well, yeah, but you still want to put it out of business, because what you want to be able to do, which is what they're doing right now, is fly their own aircraft, manned aircraft, with impunity.
Who does?
The Russians.
Well, wait a minute. Zelensky just said when he went home, give us the F-16s or whatever he wanted, and let us fly them. Ukrainians can fly them just as well. So now he wants our airplanes now.
I'm sure he'll take anything you give him.
What would happen? What would happen if Ukrainian pilots were given F-16s?
I don't know, because they're not trained to fly them.
Well, he said they could do it. I guess maybe they could fly them as well as he plays the piano. I don't really know what they're capable of. But this is not a laughing business. Look, you're a serious guy. I tend to. When I get tense, I tend to tell jokes. That's what I've done since grade school. You and I would have had a lot of fun having a few drinks together. But this is not a joking matter, Colonel. We're talking about war and peace. We're talking about pushing Putin to a corner. Every day I see another story. He's near dead. Yesterday they put out the bullshit, pardon me, that U.S. cancer therapies were keeping him alive. Where are they getting this from?
I don't know. I have no idea. And when people ask me, is Mr. Putin seriously ill? Is he dying? I have no idea. I don't remember back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, we had these people that called themselves Kremlinologists, and they would sit around and sort of conjecture about which Russian on the Politburo said what. This is a waste of time.
Okay.
We're dealing with the Russian state and its armed forces. That's where we need to focus. We're not dealing with one man. Putin is not alone, and he has the backing of the Russian people. Anybody who thinks otherwise is crazy.
Unbelievable. So the Russian people want this over with as well.
Of course, everyone wants this to end. I'm sure there are lots of Ukrainians who would like it to end. I've watched videos of Ukrainian soldiers that were posted by them on the internet, and then suddenly they were removed because Ukrainian soldiers were saying, we're tired, we're freezing, we're running low on ammunition. If you complain or if you talk about surrendering or deserting, they pick you up, take you away, and they never see you again.
Oh my
So
God.
we know the Ukrainian enforcers are out there threatening people. We know that they're now scraping the bottom of the barrel. They're trying to bring in teenagers, put them in uniform, hand them rifles, send them forward.
Is that where they're at?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, Ukraine's in very serious trouble. And if you listen carefully to Zelensky, he said, well, thank you very much for sending all that you have, but it's really not enough.
Right. So
And
always
then,
not enough.
and then in his interview with The Economist and his commanding general, Zaluzhny, they both flat out said that the probability of withstanding what is coming in the winter from Russia is very low. You can give us a lot of things that will help, but they are far stronger than we thought, and we are not as strong as we said. I mean, they've been as honest as they can without
That's pretty
jeopardizing
amazing.
the phony narrative.
Yeah. Well, Colonel, on the last podcast with me, you mentioned a winter offensive, and of course, the smart money says that Russia's going to use the winter as they have used
Yes.
since prior to Napoleonic times to defeat the enemy. Of course, it was in reverse. That's where the enemy had invaded Russia. We understand that. So, why would the winter be in favor of Russia when their own troops have to fight in that same weather going forward?
Well, the Russian soldiers don't lack for proper clothing. They don't lack for heat. They don't lack for food. They don't lack for ammunition. They have been training very, very vigorously. And one of the reasons they've been waiting is that in southern Ukraine, down near Odessa and the southern part of the area held by the Russians, it still is not frozen. During the day, the temperature rises to about 34 degrees, and at night it falls to 20. In order for you to move effectively with thousands of armored fighting vehicles and wheels and so forth, it has to drop below freezing and stay there. Now, northern Ukraine is frozen, but the south is not. And they're waiting for that to happen. And they need 2 weeks of consecutive days of freezing temperatures in the south for the ground to freeze.
Unbelievable. See, now we're talking with a man who commanded a tank. How many tanks were under your command, Colonel?
Well, we had 42 tanks, 42 Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, and 8 guns, 155 millimeter self-propelled cannon.
What does
1,100 men?
That's what you commanded in.
Well, that's what I led into battle. Yes,
led into battle. You weren't sitting in a chair in the Pentagon.
yeah.
What kind of tanks do the Russians have these days?
Well, they have now put T-90s into the field. What we were dealing with at the beginning of this were a lot of tanks that had been sitting in essentially the equivalent of a used car lot. In other words, 7,000 old tanks. And the Russian troops were told when they went into Ukraine, if there's anything wrong with this thing, don't try to fix it. If it's damaged in combat, just get out, walk away from it. We'll give you another tank. They really did not bank on this major war. They thought there would be a negotiated settlement. Remember? So now what has happened is that the T-90s are finding their way into all the Russian units, T-80s and T-90s. The T-90 is the best available that they've got, which is in most ways equal to or as good as an M1.
Is it?
Yeah, it is. And the advantage that the Russians have over us in the tank department is not so much in armament. Our armament is excellent. Our guns are excellent. Our problem is the engine. We have a turbine engine in the tank. And as most of your viewers understand, turbine engines were designed for use by jet aircraft. Well, we put a turbine engine back in the late 70s, early 80s into the M1 series tanks. And the turbine engine problem is that as long as it sits still and you've got the engine running, it burns as much as it does running when you're moving. In other words, whether you're moving or sitting still, you've got about 7.5 to 8 hours of fuel. That's it. So you tend to shut the tank down. Now, they built since 1990 an auxiliary power pack. They want to turn on while you're sitting still. But the problem with all of that is that you've got to shut that down, and then it takes a little time to crank up the turbine engine. So you have a very, very high fuel usage rate with the tanks, far higher than the Russians. And then secondly, the turbine engine burns at 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit.
Oh, boy.
It emits a thermal signature that can be viewed from low Earth orbiting satellites at 70 or 80,000 feet.
You're talking about our M1s.
Yes.
And the Russians don't have turbine engines?
No, they're using the traditional diesel engines.
Oh.
And they also have thermal blankets, which they put over their engine compartments in order to conceal the thermal signature.
This is
so our thermal signature stands out brilliantly. Very easy to find us.
From the sky.
Yes, all the way up into space. And that also makes you a brilliant target for anybody who wants to destroy you.